Good afternoon. We are in those portions of the Torah that talk about the Exodus, or Exodus as the movie was described, but it's probably more correct to say Exodus. We were slaves in Egypt, and God intervened and brought us out through many miracles. Part of the miracles were punishments for the Egyptians. And those punishments, those plagues, numbered 10. There were other punishments, but plagues were 10. The plagues are divided into two different Torah portions. One was last week, where the last three of the plagues are mentioned, and the other 7 are found 2 weeks ago in Parshas Va'era. This week, of course, is Parshas Beshalach, and tomorrow we will read about Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and how we walked across dry land to safety and freedom, and the Egyptians followed, and the waters came crashing down upon them, and they were shattered, totally overwhelmed intellectually as to what they were seeing, and ultimately they all drowned. Why does the Torah divide this into 3 separate phases, 3 separate acts, if you will, Torah portions? They could have been condensed and brought into one Torah portion. What is the lesson that we can draw from that in our daily lives? So, I'm sure there are many interpretations. But in Parshas Ve'era there are 7 plagues. In Parshas Bo there are 3. In Parshas Beshalach there are no plagues, but there's one punishment: the drowning of the Egyptians at the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, the Yamsuf. And why is there different stages for all of this? And it's my opinion as follows. The Egyptians believed in their ideology. They believed themselves to be superior to all other nations. It's no wonder that they felt that they could enslave other people to do their bidding, because they were the chosen. They were God's special creatures. But don't we say the same thing? Yes, we do. We say that we are God's chosen nation. And the Egyptians said, if you are God's chosen nation, then how come we're tougher and badder and more powerful than you, and we can do with you as we please? And that's what the nations of the world, both the Muslims and the Christians, have been saying for the last close to 2,000 years. The Christians about 1,800 years, more or less, give a few. And the Muslims for about 1,350 years, 1,360 years. They were saying the same thing. If you are God's chosen, why are we over you? Why do we lord over you? And we can do whatever we want. That's a sign that you're not God's chosen. We're God's chosen. And that's what the Egyptians said as well. And because they felt themselves to be God's chosen, they felt justified in enslaving a group of people that had never warred with them, that had never done anything to them. This by itself, the smugness, the arrogance, the selfishness, not just self-confidence, but the irrational self-importance of the Egyptians made it necessary for God to punish them in different stages. The first stage was for them to look into their own character, their own belief system, their own conduct. The second stage is specifically how they treat others and how they treated the children of Israel. And the third stage is the emergence of God's favored, of God's chosen, in front of not just the Egyptians, but in front of the entire world. The first 7 plagues were attacks upon the Egyptian belief system and their character. The belief that which conveys material to you, material abundance to you, that somehow or other that is a gift, and that is something that has to be worshipped. The Nile was worshipped. It was worshipped because it provided the Egyptians with just about all their needs. The Nile River Delta, one of the most fertile areas on earth, to this day supports close to 100 million people, maybe more, maybe 120 million people. The Nile River Delta is an area of lush greenery in a sea of sand. It's an island of plenty amidst total barrenness. There are no rains in Egypt. There's no natural water, and yet Egypt is blessed. That part of Egypt is blessed with abundance, with very little need to work at it. It's no wonder that they had the ability to do other things with themselves, because they didn't need to do things in order to survive. So they could build buildings and ships and raise armies and create observation posts to look at the heavens, to observe the natural order of things. They had abundance. The source of their abundance was a physical river. That's all it was a river. They were fortunate. They lived in a part of the world where their needs were taken care of. And for a couple of thousand years, on and off, they were the most powerful nation on earth. Why were they the most powerful? Not because they were the smartest or the best or, most talented. Because they had the ability to focus on other things other than survival. Most peoples on this earth, at the time of the Egyptians, struggled to survive. There's only a few places in the world as productive, as fertile, as blessed as the Nile River Delta. So God showed them that a blessing isn't coming from a river, from a physical source. A blessing comes from the heavens, from God himself. And the fact that you're the recipient of a blessing doesn't mean that you're automatically special. It means that you've been chosen to do things. Instead of focusing that the blessings allow them to share their wealth with others, to share their good fortune with others, they took it as a sign that because they were more fortunate, they could dominate others. And that had to be broken. That had to be challenged. And the first 7 plagues went about to challenge those beliefs, those mistaken conclusions, those smug attitudes. And to some degree, it was successful because there were many among the Egyptians who understood that just because you're the beneficiary of some good, that doesn't mean that automatically that you're good. It means that you have to step up and become better and become good. Most of them, at least the ones in charge, did not get this lesson. Individuals did. Many individuals. But not the authorities. Because the authorities felt that if they became softer, they became more accommodating, they shared more, they would lose it all. Give them a finger, they want your hand. Instead of realizing that their blessings could support others in their times of need, despite the fact that they could share their wisdom, they could share their insights, they could share their creativity, they chose not to. And this great flaw of character was what God attacked. The arrogance, the smugness, the lack of caring for another, the feeling that they could dominate others without any compunction. That's why they had to be punished. The second set of punishments deals primarily with their relationship with Klal Yisrael. They enslaved the people of Israel. They, of course, believed that they were superior to Israel, and they were afraid that maybe they weren't, and maybe Israel was. And by dominating Israel, they convinced themselves over and over again, no, these are not blessed by God. If they were blessed by God, we wouldn't be dominating them. Perhaps there's another reason for that. They refused to accept the possibility that there was another reason. They believed that their God was superior to the Jewish God. They believed that their needs were superior to Jewish needs. And therefore, they had the right to economically deprave the children of Israel from their economy, from the rewards of their labors, and take it for themselves. When you enslave someone, you take away that person's ability to earn for themselves, to take care of their own in an honorable fashion. And they based their economy on slavery. Therefore, since their entire economy was dependent upon a slavery that was not just inappropriate and inhumane, but illegal. There are reasons and justifications for slavery. When you fought someone and you beat them, it usually was a fight to the death. So empires decided to give their vanquished foes the option of enslavement instead of death. Because in the ancient world, wars were fought over economy, fought over survival. If I can't survive, then I have to take it from you. You, on the other hand, protect your place, protect your people, and therefore attack me. And whoever wins, there's not room enough for both of them. Because if there was, if I had all that I needed, I wouldn't need to attack you. So, the vanquished foe was not allowed to survive because there wasn't enough for both the victor and the nation defeated. Then emperors decided, well, there's another way out. We can actually use the vanquished to help us in our economic, not just survival, but day-to-day activities. This would allow us to reach greater heights or to become wealthier or to become more knowledgeable, etc., to be able to release us so that we could engage in military conquest and so on. But the justification for slavery was that we fought each other. One side won, the other side didn't. The ones that won usually killed the other. Eventually they figured out that they could allow the others to live if they would accept enslavement. So slavery was a resultant of a war for survival. And the rationale for slavery was, better they work for us than we kill them. We get everything that they have right now, but we can't get anything from them the next day or the next month or the next year. But if you enslave them, you have the benefit of them for many generations. But that's only when you had a war. There was no war between Israel, the children of Israel, and the Egyptians. The Israelites were very faithful citizens of the Egyptian Empire. Reminds me of Germans of the Mosaic persuasion, the way the Reformed Jews considered themselves prior to Hitler. They considered themselves as Germans. I'm sure many Israelites considered themselves in those days as Egyptians. Egyptians of the Brahmic persuasion. But there was no justification for the slavery. Israel was not at war with the Egyptians. In fact, they were loyal citizens. They brought them blessings through Joseph. And then Jacob brought them further blessings. So instead of acknowledging that a lot of their wealth and success came from the children of Israel, they treated them as if they had been their enemies. And because they were fearful of Israel joining their enemies, therefore they could enslave them. This was a pseudo-war, a war of possibilities. They might become our enemies. Therefore, we must enslave them now instead of fighting them later. So the economy of the Egyptians was through slavery, but it was an unjustified slavery. There was no war to cause the slavery. There was no battle. There was no enmity. That, in the mores of the ancient world, was wrong. It was evil. A lot of people say, wait a second, American slavery was evil. Yeah, it was evil. But who, just an aside, who sold whom into slavery? One African tribe sold another African tribe into slavery. Who were the middlemen? Arab middlemen. Muslims. Who were the buyers? Colonists in the Americas, from England, France, and other European countries. Instead of blaming their countrymen for selling them as slaves, or blaming the Muslims, the Arabs, for serving as the middlemen, a lot of the descendants of those slaves blame the Jews. We didn't sell them. We weren't the middlemen. Oh, you had a Dutch East Indian Company that transported the slaves and made money on them. We didn't initiate the war. We didn't initiate the sales. We didn't serve as the the middlemen for the slavery. But oh, you provided the ships at a time when slavery was the way of the world. It wasn't racism that caused slavery. It was the dominance of one group over the other, just as it had been for thousands of years. But in this case, it was the dominance of one tribe over another, and instead of killing them, they decided to make money off of them. And so the descendants of those slaves are proud of their African heritage. Yeah? Who sold you as a slave? Who made you a slave? And many of them accept Islam. Who were the middlemen that sold you? Muslims, Arab Muslims. Slavery was permitted, was practiced in the Muslim lands until the 1960s. That don't make a difference. The recipients who needed them, they're the ones that are vilified, but they're not vilified as much as the Jews. Very few Jews owned slaves or used slaves. And I have news for you, very few Jews actually transported slaves. Most of us, 99% of us, were trying to survive and avoid being killed by the Polacks, by the Lithuanians, by the French, by the British, by the Germans, by the Russians. Wherever there was a Jew, the Jew was subject to persecution. And because he was subject to persecution, we had a sensitivity to those who were persecuted as well. The fact that some of us might not have and might have made a profit on it is an indictment of those people, but not of Jews in general, because Jews had nothing to do with the enslavement of African Americans. In fact, the Jews were the first to embrace the cause of African Americans in their quest for equality and freedom. But that's a side issue. Enslavement outside of the children of Israel was usually the result of a war, and that's what happened with black Africans. There was a war, there were wars constantly. You see the Hutus and the Tutsis killed each other. To this day, kill each other. There are tribes who are forever at war with other tribes. And same way in Europe, just that instead of using machetes and spears, they use machine guns and rocket ships. Some or other that's supposed to be more civilized. I don't know. At any rate, we Jews did not have a fight with the Egyptians. So the enslavement of the Jewish people had no justification at all. There was no fight. They weren't sold as slaves by their captors. That happened later, but not in Egypt. And that's why the eighth plague comes along. The eighth plague of locusts destroys the entire economy of Egypt. And then there's darkness. The Egyptians believed that their science and their technology made them the light of the world. Their ideology was advanced over all others. They believed themselves to be the sons of the light. Israel said, no. There's no truth to your beliefs. The fact that you have some knowledge in science and technology does not make you a better person. What makes a person a better person is his character. What makes the person a better person is his ability to share with others. What makes a person a better person is his humility before God, realizing that everything comes from the Creator. And so the ideology of the Jew was challenged by the Egyptian as darkness, and that their own ideology was light. And God, therefore, made it light in all the places where Jews were, where the Israelites were. There was light wherever they lived. But for the Egyptians, there was darkness. And there are two stages of darkness. One is an absence of light. The other is to remain glued in your place. God was teaching them that it's one thing to have a false ideology, But when somebody proves conclusively that you have a false ideology, why don't you listen? Why do you sit on your haunches and keep up and try to bolster belief in something that's obviously false? The reason why they couldn't get up is because they didn't want to let go of the false ideology, of the darkness that they believed in. They didn't want to let go of it. Why? Because they didn't want to let go of their belief that their ways were right. And despite all of the apparent and obvious proofs that they had it wrong, they refused to do anything about it. That's why the second part of the plague, they couldn't pick themselves up because they refused to move and change. So they were rooted in their seats. They couldn't move. This is a punishment because they refused to move when it was obvious. It was obviously false what they believed. It was obviously true what Israel believed. And the final plague, Israel is my firstborn, says God. If you hold on to my firstborn, I will kill your firstborn child. Now, what actually happened here? God take knives and slaughter an innocent Egyptian child? Does God take pleasure in the death of tens or hundreds of thousands of young people? The Or Chaim explains. The Egyptians claimed that they were superior spiritually to the Jews. If we weren't spiritually superior to you, then how does the God of Israel allow us to enslave you? Therefore, we must conclude that the ultimate God is our God, and He has made us better, stronger, wiser than you. So God said, okay, if you are the ultimate in humanity, you are the most pious, the most ethical, the most spiritual or holy. I will appear to all of you. Let's see what happens. I'm warning you that if you continue this path, all your firstborn will die. But this is a process of God appearing to all those who lived in Egypt. And the question is, who is capable of the divine presence? The Egyptians claimed that they had the divine presence. Israel claimed they had the divine presence. So the divine presented itself. To whom? Not to everyone. To the firstborn. Why the firstborn, you might ask? because the firstborn were always the ones who ministered the religion. The firstborn children of Israel ministered religion to the flock. The firstborn of the Egyptians did the same. And now the divine appears to both of them, the Jew and the Egyptian. And divinity, true divinity, is very powerful. It's like a magnet. It draws those to whom it appears towards it. If one isn't careful, one can die out of rapture. So how does one avoid dying out of rapture? Because rapture isn't the important thing. The most important thing is action. God wants your actions. God wants you to be righteous. God wants you to be kind. God wants you to be a person of faith, believing in a divine hand, but behaving, not just civil with others, but realizing that the others also have the image of God within them, and being kind to those who are in the image of God. So the divine presence presents itself. And what is the firstborn of Egypt? What is his receptacle like? Does he share his food with others? Does he share his wealth with others? Does he shed a tear at another's pain? The answer is no. And the divine presence draws the Egyptian close to it, and the Egyptian soul is dissatisfied with the body within which it is found and only wants to come to God. It recognizes that it's been a mistake all of these years. It's only God. And what we stand for is a lie. And the soul doesn't want to stay in that body. Yes, the Egyptians' firstborn die in rapture, yes, in a love for the divine and a disdain for who they are and what they became. The Jewish firstborn never had the opportunity to share their wealth with anyone. They hadn't been wealthy in over 100 years. But they're willing to put themselves aside for the divine will. That's been shown by their devotion to offering the God of Egypt as a sacrifice to the Creator. They also show that they're willing to undergo pain for God's glory by circumcising themselves. The Jewish body is not a despicable vessel for the Jewish soul. The Jewish soul has no reason to go away from the body. On the contrary, through the body does mitzvahs, does God's will. so the Jewish soul can have God while it's still in a Jewish body. Despite the fact that it wants to connect to God, it doesn't feel that it has to leave the body to do so. And so the choice is clear. God has shown that the souls of the Egyptians and the souls of the Israelites in the presence of God have two different conclusions. The soul of the Egyptian doesn't want to stay in its body. The soul of the Israelite has no reason to leave because it has sanctified God with its body. So this is the lesson. And the same thing happens at Kriyas Yamsuf. Pharaoh posits that we have been cruel to the Israelites. But that doesn't mean we aren't superior. And it doesn't allow the Israelites to take things from us without paying for it. And the Israelites, as much as they want to worship their God is not superior to our God. And their way is not superior to our way. The only reason for the punishments is because we got a little carried away. But now we've learned our lesson. But we're still better people. Because the Israelites, when they had the chance to, behaved just like us. You know what? Some of them behaved even worse than us. And that's what the Gentiles said. That's what Hitler said. All the depravity of the world comes from the Jew. When the Jew goes away from the source, and to a certain degree was forced to stray from the source. When the Jew goes away from his source, he not only behaves like the Goy, he can out-Goy the Goy. Jews are good at what they do. They know how to embellish things and make things appear to be grander than they are. It's one thing deluding yourself. It's quite another making the immoral appear to be moral. So arguing the rights of self-expression to allow for depravity, to allow for immorality. That's what happens. So the Egyptian says, who are the most immoral in Hollywood, in Las Vegas? Who started Las Vegas? Bugsy Siegel and his cohorts. Meyer Lansky and his cohorts. And that's what the Egyptians were saying at the time of the splitting of the sea. And God said, yeah, these are depraved people and these are depraved people. The difference between them is one did so out of choice and the other did so because they saw no other opportunity for themselves. The Jew by nature doesn't want to do that. Only when forced through pogroms, through genocide, through the Inquisition of the Church, through 2,000 years of trying to survive. That's how you get a lepke buchalter and a Bugsy Siegel. But the Egyptians, nobody was persecuting them. Nobody tried to destroy them at every movement of their lives. What they did in a depraved way was their choice, not an act of survival or a desire to not be persecuted. Whatever the Israelites did was a process of trying to survive, trying to hang on, trying not to be the one who was being driven out and being attacked. And so God made a judgment. The wicked of the Israelites could be tolerated because of the circumstances through which they became depraved. It was not depravity of choice. It was not the glorification of evil. It was the desire to survive, plain and simple. But the rest of the Israelites, totally different than the Egyptians. So the judgment was not on all of the Jews. The judgment was, what about all those Jews who had assimilated? Why did they deserve to be redeemed? And God said, because they didn't know any better. Because everybody likes the winners. Nobody likes the losers. Because people, in their frustration with their past and the pain of their past, try to be like those who persecuted them. But you have to know the course of everything. And therefore, even those Israelites who started the Las Vegas of Egypt were also redeemed. Nobody was left. Nobody shared the fate of the Egyptians. And that's, in a nutshell, what happened. So what can we learn from this? We learn that we have to have Ahavas Yisrael. There are very few Jews who choose to be evil. They don't glorify evil. If they're engaged in evil, they're ashamed of their own evil. The Egyptians and those who are the descendants of the Egyptians don't do that. They're not ashamed of their evil. They glorify the evil. They revel in it. They think it's good. Jews have never, ever deluded themselves into believing that it's good. Only when the Jews are completely removed from their tradition, everybody looks for an ideal, and the Jew sometimes can stand for false ideals. But that's a result of their persecution, not the cause of it. And therefore, all Jews, no matter who they are, no matter how small they may seem to be, all Jews will be redeemed by God speedily in our days.